What's going on? Welcome back. Yes, welcome back to Off the Schneid. We're back. I'm back making some regular content on my channel. If you've been with the channel for a little while, I was away doing some work with another channel, doing a weekly show over there. But figured it's time to come back to my channel. It's been about a year. I did mock draft was the last content that I put out almost exactly a year ago. But hopefully we can get some more regular content on the channel. Look forward to it. I got 4 videos, I think, locked up, ready to go. Be doing a mock draft again this year. I only do one, as you know, if you've been on the channel for a little while. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. A little more live stuff, so I can interact with the subscribers and chat in the chit chat in the chat, if you will. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited. Hopefully you guys are back. Thank you for everybody sticking with me that stuck with the channel, stayed subscribed, and welcome to all the new folks out there joining in. So yeah, let's get into it. What we're talking about today is going to be the top 5 landing spots in this year's NFL draft for tight ends, running backs, wide receivers, as well as quarterbacks. So we'll blow through it, that not in that order, but we're going to start with tight ends. Basically what we're looking for this year's, K. Dotton, Daniel Bellinger, Kenny Walker, even though he was a high pick, but his landing spot was massive for him. The Green Bay Packers wide receivers, those types of guys. But the cream of the crop we're looking for this year is Dameon Pierce, right? Those guys that can come in, make a difference to your fantasy team, whether it's redraft or dynasty, and then, potentially be trade assets. A guy like Daniel Bellinger, yeah, it's probably not going to work out super long term with him, with Darren Waller coming in, but that guy's a tradable asset. I drafted him in one of my dynasty leagues, traded him before the season started, and got some serious value. I mean, whoever I traded him to, I can't remember, obviously, but they got some value as well for a bit of that last season. And then, now they're kind of stuck with them. So those are the types of guys that we're looking for. There's some spots that we got to keep an eye on, and it doesn't particularly matter who the player is. Not a lot of guys were high on Dameon Pierce last year, but when he landed at the Houston Texans, opportunity takes over, and then he runs with it. So we're looking for those guys that, given the opportunity, because I think the opportunity is going to be there, and then hopefully they run with it and they're going to be an asset for your fantasy team. So like I said, let's jump into it. We're going to start at tight end. The number 5 landing spot for tight end this year, the Los Angeles Chargers. So with Kellen Moore coming over, I fully expected Dalton Schultz to be a Charger this year. Obviously, he didn't. He went to the Houston Texans. That was a little surprising. They do still have Gerald Everett on the roster, Trey McKitty, Dalton Parham. They still have these guys. They can walk away from Gerald Everett. Not that I think they do. I think it's $4 million to pay him to stay, and then $4 million in savings if they wanted to cut him. But either way, I think there's some opportunity there with a quarterback like Justin Herbert. Again, Kellen Moore coming in. You know how much he likes to throw the ball. They got a quality offensive line. So especially in a dynasty format, I think the Chargers are a fantastic landing spot for a tight end. Moving on to number 4. The number 4 landing spot, the Las Vegas Raiders, with Foster Moreau leaving. Unfortunately, it looks like he has cancer. They caught it in the medical screening with the Saints. So thank goodness they found it, and hopefully he recovers and gets back at it. I want him to be a Bengal. What do you think of the surroundings, by the way? The new and improved. I didn't even touch on that. But either way, Foster Moreau's off the team, unfortunately. Hopefully he gets back to being fully healthy and playing football. They traded away Darren Waller, so that leaves a massive hole at tight end. They do have Austin Hooper, who came in, and then O.J. Howard as well is on the roster. But those guys I'm not really concerned about. Chig Okonkwo beat out Austin Hooper last year, a 4th-round tight end. Again, it's those types of opportunities that we're looking for. So to beat out Austin Hooper and O.J. Howard, I'm really not concerned with that. I think this is a quality landing spot with the offensive coordinator and the offensive coach. Obviously, Josh McDaniels there. Jimmy Garoppolo comes in. You got a relatively quality quarterback. There's lots of mouths to feed. Hunter Renfrow, Jacoby Myers comes in, and obviously Devontae Adams. But, you're not looking for a crazy amount here, 400 or 500 yards, 4 to 6 touchdowns, something like that. If you get that out of a 4th-round tight end, I think you're printing money at that point. So that's the number 4 landing spot for tight end. Let's move over to the number 3 landing spot. We got the Green Bay Packers. So it's a little bit of a kind of hot mess in Green Bay right now. I do think that a trade ultimately does get done. I just think that the Jets are a little too invested at this point, that they have to get Aaron Rodgers. It'd be pretty tough to explain that away to your fan base when, it's been on the burner for months now. I think it does ultimately get done. And then Jordan Love's going to be the quarterback here in Green Bay. But beyond that, even at the wide receiver position, there's not a lot of competition here for targets. I think there's plenty of target share open for a tight end, especially if they get a skilled one. A lot of mock drafts have, a guy like Dalton Kincaid going here, potentially Michael Mayer. Honestly, I don't know if I see any tight end going in the first round, just because there is so much depth. With tight end and running back, there's a ton of depth in this year's draft. So I think that you just wait, unless you really love Dalton Kincaid or Michael Mayer. I don't think anyone could fall in love with Michael Mayer enough to take him in the first round. That's for sure. That's just my opinion. Maybe Dalton Kincaid, but I'm not taking him in the first round, especially halfway through the first round like the Packers are. If they do want to trade down and get him, I guess, but I don't particularly see that happening. But, third, fourth, fifth round, if they get a tight end that's quality, and in this year's draft, I think that's perfectly reasonable to expect. I think that's a good landing spot. And again, there's not a crazy amount of mouths to feed in Green Bay here. You got Christian Watson, who's still unproven, and his ADP is a little out of control, if you ask me. But Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, really not much here that you have to compete with. Josiah DeGuara at the tight end spot, really not concerned. Aaron Jones is a quality running back. A.J. Dillon's a quality running back. But until they start, running the ball like they should with those two running backs, I'm just going to think they're going to keep throwing the ball. So not a lot of mouths to feed. I think there's definitely some room for a tight end to come in here and really excel, especially if he's skilled. It's going to come down to how Jordan Love is as a quarterback. This offensive line needs some work, but they can definitely address that in the draft. And I think that's what they do in the first round. They're going to have to look for a bookend tackle, I think, with Bakhtiari eventually probably going to be hanging him up maybe after this year, especially with Aaron Rodgers gone. We'll see how that works out. So the O-line can use some work, but they have a lot of, swing guys and guys that can move around that line that they can just, if they draft a guy this year, which again, I think they do in this year's draft, in the first round, I think they draft a tackle, and then you can just put the best 5 guys out there. And with DeGuara being a quality blocker, again, I think if there's there's an opening here for a quality tight end, Luke Musgrave, a guy like that, maybe, I think could fit in well with this team and again, really, really excel and potentially be the number 1 target on this team. Again, Christian Watson's still unproven, like it or not, he is. So that's the number 3 spot for tight end. I think that's a team we need to keep an eye on in this year's draft if they do end up picking a tight end in the 4th, 5th round. Let's move on to the number 2 spot. We got the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, Mike Gesicki leaves. He goes up to a division rival with the New England Patriots, which I think is a fantastic landing spot for him. Basically, your competition is Durham Smythe. And I don't know about you, but that doesn't make me nervous whatsoever. So again, not going to happen in the first round because the Dolphins don't have a first round pick, but I don't see any tight end going in the first round. I'm certainly not taking one, even though all the signs behind me here, and we'll see who's at number 1, but I'm not taking a tight end in the first round personally. But again, no competition at the tight end position. There's Tyreek Hill, obviously, and Jalen Waddle are the 2 main targets on this team. They're always going to be while they're on the team. That's not going to change. But there is room for a 3rd target, and it doesn't look like, unless they draft a guy at wide receiver, right? I'm not really concerned about Cedric Wilson. I don't think they love him there anyways. There's some other mouths to feed, but I'm really not concerned at the wide receiver spot on the Dolphins. They definitely could use a guy that is more George Kittle-like than Mike Gesicki. I just feel like that's the reason why Mike Gesicki didn't excel in this offense. Is Mike McDaniel likes a tight end that can block as well as get open, run routes, and ultimately catch the ball and get you fantasy points. And I don't think that Gesicki just fit the mold that he was looking for at that position. And again, Durham Smythe, Eric Saubert, I'm really not concerned. They traded away Hunter Long in the Jalen Ramsey deal. So there's an opening here for a pass catcher, and it doesn't have to come from the wide receiver position, because I don't particularly see them drafting one too high. They just picked up Don't Call Me Robbie Chosen Anderson. Braxton Berrios comes over again from a division rival with the Jets. But other than that, Tyreek Hill, of course, Jalen Waddle, of course, but there's room for another 3. And I think that could definitely be at the tight end position, a lot like you see with the San Francisco 49ers with Debo, Ayuk, and George Kittle. So I think there's totally an opening here. Again, I'm not taking one in the first round. They don't even have a first round pick, but 3rd, 4th, 5th, even potentially the 6th round, depending on how deep it gets, because it is a super deep tight end class. So we'll see, but I think they need a guy like, maybe a guy that I like is Sam Laporta. I think Sam Laporta would fit in fantastic with this team. He can do a lot of the things, comes from the same school as George Kittle. So I think that's a good spot for him. Makes tons of sense to me. He can do all the similar things. He should be able to do all the things that Mike McDaniels wants out of that position. But we'll see where they kind of land, but this is definitely a spot that we need to keep an eye on. Again, the number 2 spot for a tight end. You're looking for value here. These types of positions, tight end, potentially some running backs later in the draft. If you're a 2nd, 3rd round pick, you're sitting there looking at a guy that's drafted, a tight end that's drafted by the Miami Dolphins. I'm picking him. I really don't care what his name is. I'll look at some measurables and stuff like that, but I'm going to take a shot on him, in the 3rd round of a 12-team fantasy draft. You better believe it. So number 2 spot, the Miami Dolphins. Number 1 spot, you see the team behind me. I think this makes tons of sense. I think there's a few spots, and we'll get into it throughout the duration of this show here. I think there's a few spots that you can really excel, and keep an eye on the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously, the offensive line should be covered this year. Orlando Brown, and then Jonah Williams. To be honest, Jonah Williams is going to be forced to play the right side. And there's really nothing he can do about it. There's nothing anyone can do about it. Just play out your last year, your contract. This is the final year. No one's going to trade for you. It's just, play the last year of your contract on the right side and earn yourself another contract in free agency, and then come back and stick it to the Bengals. Do what you got to do. And they do still have Lael Collins there, Alex Kappa, Cordell Volson, Jackson Carman. All of a sudden, the Cincinnati Bengal offensive line is in an extremely good spot. If you ask me, is probably the best spot it's ever been since I've been a fan of this team, with obviously Orlando Brown coming in. So the wide receiver position is basically set. I don't think Jamar Chase has hit his ceiling yet. T. Higgins is right there. He certainly hasn't hit his ceiling yet either, and hopefully we can keep this team together. We'll see. Tyler Boyd, one of the better slot receivers in the league, super, super underrated in my opinion. He's there as well, but there's obviously room for, Hayden Hurst type numbers on this team. I'm not expecting any 1,000-yard tight end or anything like that, but again, 400 to 600 yards, 4 to 6 touchdowns. I think that's completely viable, with Joe Burrow as your quarterback. Brian Callahan's still there as the offensive coordinator. Everything's pretty much set on this team. It's a very, very quality team, very quality offense, and one of the best young quarterbacks in the game, if I do say so myself. So you got to beat out Irv Smith, who might finally get a chance to swerve. Let Irv swerve, right? Devin Aussie, Drew Sample, 2nd-round pick a couple years ago. I'm really not concerned. We haven't seen enough out of Irv Smith for me to be concerned about a rookie being able to come in and beat him out for that job. I think it's going to be a relatively high priority in the draft of the Bengals. They never really trade up, at least certainly not in the first round. And I sincerely hope they don't draft a tight end in the first round this year. If they do, maybe Dalton Kincaid, because they have some blocking tight ends. And if it is, I'm even more excited. I'm unhappy as a Bengals fan, because I don't want that to be the pick in the first round. A guy that I like potentially is a local kid, Josh Wiley. I think is a guy that the Bengals might look at. I think just a side note, regardless, I think Tyler Scott or Josh Wiley are going to be a Bengal, both local guys. So we'll see how that works out. But this is the number 1 spot to keep your eye on for tight ends. Any tight end that gets drafted to the Bengals, whether it's 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th round, I'm going to take a shot on, again, especially in a dynasty format. If Irv Smith ends up falling on his face and being nothing, similar to how it ended up in Minnesota, then there you go. And he's only on a 1-year deal anyways. So keep your eyes out. If a tight end goes to the Cincinnati Bengals, that's certainly somewhere that I'm looking, and I'll take a shot on. So let's move to quarterbacks. Let's get into the quarterback position. It's obviously a hot topic. It's going to get better and better as we go. Tight ends, obviously the lowest on the totem pole. So I figured I'd start there, but let's move to quarterbacks. Some honorable mentions. All right, this is going to get a little convoluted here. So some honorable mention landing spots. Obviously, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They got a second-round pick, Kyle Trask, from a few years ago. I really like. I had Kyle Trask ranked higher than Zach Wilson in my ranking. Zach Wilson wasn't even a top 5 quarterback in his draft year for me. And I want to see him get a shot. We'll see. Baker Mayfield obviously comes in. He's still only 28 years old. So realistically, Baker Mayfield could be the quarterback in Tampa Bay for the next 6 years. We'll see how that works out. But I mean, again, it's an honorable mention. If a third round quarterback goes here, if a guy like Hendon Hooker goes here, then that's a guy to keep your eye on for sure. But again, that's why it's an honorable mention. It didn't make the top 5. The Jets, I only have them on here as like a caveat if they don't get Aaron Rodgers. And in a dynasty format, even if they do, I might take a sprinkle on if they draft a guy in the 5th round, like a Clayton Tune, something like that, Jake Haener, one of those types of guys later on in the draft, Stetson Bennett, whatever. I might take a shot in a dynasty format, even if they get Aaron Rodgers. So again, it's a caveat that they may or may not get A-Rod. And then, even in a dynasty format, there might still be some small value there, just a complete scratch off ticket and see what happens. I put the Atlanta Falcons as an honorable mention. I'm just a big believer in Desmond Ridder. I think they're going to give him a shot. You might as well see what you got, at least for this season. I think he showed enough last year. He showed enough in college. I thought he should have been drafted way higher than he did in his draft year, but it is what it is, and he should have the weapons. We'll see what the Falcons end up doing in the draft. I think that they absolutely get another receiver and a slot receiver. And keep your eyes out for my mock draft that'll come out on Monday. I'll schedule that in pretty soon, so that'll be a live one as well. That's definitely a spot that I think it's an honorable mention, because if it's a Hendon Hooker, someone like that, he's going to be the ultimate name thrown out there left, right, and center, that if he goes to X team, he's a guy to keep an eye on. So honorable mentions, there you go. Let me know what you think about those guys, but let's jump into the top 5. So at 5, we got the Tennessee Titans. We'll see with Ryan Tannehill. This is going to be the last year of Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee, 100%. It's the last year on his contract. There's a very reasonable possibility that they either trade him or cut him before the season starts post June 1, depending on what they do in the draft. And, don't sleep on it, but Lamar Jackson is some sort of still available. I think that if anything does happen with Lamar Jackson, it's going to happen after the draft. I'll say that if anything does happen with Lamar and he moves teams, it's going to happen after the draft, in my opinion. So again, that falls in line with the Tennessee Titans post June 1. This isn't just about rookies either. This isn't 100% all about rookies. With the quarterback position, I'm throwing Lamar Jackson in here a little bit because he could be on the move still. He absolutely can be moved. And I think that there's a couple teams, this being one of them, that might take a chance on a guy like Lamar Jackson. You give away 2 first-round picks next year's and the year after. You do it after this draft. I think that's a spot. But again, Hendon Hooker is a possibility here. We've heard Will Levis, CJ Stroud with the Vrabel connections. The reason they're so low, there's not a lot of talent on offense on this team besides the running back position, right? Their offensive line, in my opinion, is in a little bit of a better spot. So that's a boost. That's a plus. But there's really not much talent for pass catchers. Trey Burks is basically your number one, and then Chigu Konkwu at tight end. He's a playmaker, but other than that, they're going to need some help on offense. So that's the biggest reason I have the Tennessee Titans so low. But again, like I said, keep an eye out for the potential of Lamar Jackson moving after the draft. Moving on to number 4, the number 4 spot for a quarterback is going to be the Houston Texans, who may or may not be selecting a quarterback at number 2 overall. A lot of things have been starting to come out in the last few weeks here that are making it seem like they're not going to be taking CJ Stroud. We'll see. In my opinion, CJ Stroud should be the number 1. selection. That's my opinion. Obviously, I know everybody knows that Bryce Young is about 97% to go to the Carolina Panthers, and that's the way I'm looking at it right now. So if they do skip, they don't take CJ Stroud or a guy like Hendon Hooker at 12, this is another spot I could see them taking a swing at, potentially Lamar Jackson. You got the 2 and the 12 this year. They got 2 first-round picks next year. After this draft, you restock your team with the 2 and the 12, and then you sign Lamar Jackson. You give up 1 first next year, 1 first the year after, and then your own first. Hopefully you get to keep. I don't know how that works, if you can give somebody else's or keep your own. But regardless, either way, with Lamar Jackson, they're not picking this high. None of these teams are. The Titans, the Houston Texans, and a couple other we'll talk about. With Lamar Jackson on your team, you're not going to be picking that low. So that's another possibility. But we'll see what happens if they do end up taking CJ Stroud. And again, keep an eye out for my mock draft. But this is a quality spot. Again, it's higher than the Texans because their offensive line is better. The Houston Texans offensive line is a decent spot. So any quarterback coming in, rookie or veteran, you're going to be at least protected reasonably. They absolutely need some help on the offensive side of the ball at wide receiver. Dalton Schultz is there. He's a quality target, kind of a catch and fall down tight end, but he's good for 600 to 800 yards and 6 to 8 touchdowns potentially. But they definitely are going to need to address wide receiver in the draft, and I think they do. So decent spot here. It's starting to get starting to get real. Let's move on to number 3, the number 3 landing spot for quarterback, the Washington Commanders. I don't know if Sam Howell's it. The comp for Sam Howell for me last year was Baker Mayfield. So take that for what it's worth. The offensive line is all right. It could definitely, again, use some work. This is, in my opinion, this is, one of 2 spots that I think are in serious contention to go after Lamar Jackson again after the draft. They pick 16th this year. And if you put Lamar Jackson on this team, they're 100% a playoff team. Any team that gets Lamar Jackson, including the Baltimore Ravens, well, they obviously weren't last year, but they should be a playoff team, right? And I think the Commanders would be. They have quality targets. Obviously, if they do go after Lamar Jackson, they'll have to probably cut Curtis Samuel again post June 1, but that works out with the narrative I'm kind of laying out here. Scary Terry's obviously there. Jahan Dotson, last year's first-round pick. They've got some talent. They've got a couple tight ends that can catch the ball. So this is the number 3 spot. I think it's a quality landing spot. I don't know if they draft one. Again, for me, it's not all about the draft. I'm including Lamar Jackson in this conversation. And I think this is a spot that we could see Lamar Jackson in next year, especially with the ownership change. I think with the new change with the Commanders, they're going to want to win. They don't mind spending money. Let's go. Let's get a playoff team put on the field this year and get things rolling for this franchise. So there you go. Number 3, I think the Commanders are a quality spot. We'll see. Again, I don't think they draft a guy. I really, really don't. There's been a few mocks that have a quarterback going at 16. I just don't particularly see it. But again, if Lamar Jackson decides to, or if they, work out a deal with Lamar Jackson, they give next year's and the year after's first round picks after the draft, I think that makes the Commanders that much better. Number 2, the Indianapolis Colts. I think we'll see. It seems like they're going to stick to their guns and and go for a rookie quarterback. With Gardner Minshew coming in, I think in a pinch, Gardner Minshew can get the job done. They got some quality targets with Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce from last year, Jelani Woods I really like as a tight end. Kylan Granson, Mo Alley Cox are there as well, but quality pass catchers, quality playmakers, a decent offensive line. I think that can still use a little bit of work. Some of those guys are a little overpaid, but it is what it is. Quality enough, decent team. But it seems like they're going to stick to their guns. We'll see who's there at number 4. I couldn't see CJ Stroud getting past this team at 4. I would be absolutely floored unless, again, the caveat here that I'll keep mentioning, unless they think that they're getting a deal done with Lamar Jackson. And again, they pick 4th this year. If Lamar Jackson's a Colt, there's a 0% chance they're picking in the top 10 or even top 20, in my opinion. So there you go. There's another little nugget to throw in there with the Lamar Jackson wrinkle that's just kind of sitting on the outskirts of this draft. I think people are forgetting about it a little bit, but I think there's a massive potential. I'll say it again, that Lamar Jackson signs with the team after the draft, especially some of these teams that pick a little bit higher, that if you get him, you will not be picking that high next year. So let's get rid of that draft pick. And the year after, we'll have Lamar Jackson. You should be making the playoffs the next 2 years anyways. That's at least the hope if you're spending that kind of money on Lamar Jackson. So there you go. But it's the number 2 spot for landing spot for a quarterback with the playmakers they have, the offensive line, the new coaching staff, offensive minded coach. We'll see what happens. So I don't mind anyone that goes to the Colts, even if it is a rookie. Like I said, if CJ Stroud lands here, I'll be even higher on CJ Stroud than I already am. I don't believe them that they have Will Levis above Anthony Richardson. I really, really do not believe that. There's a 0% chance that I'm picking Will Levis over Anthony Richardson. Is Will Levis more ready to start an NFL game tomorrow? Absolutely. You better believe it. I'll never say anything different than that. But I would take the chance on Anthony Richardson 100 times out of 100 over Will Levis. You know pretty much exactly what you're going to get. My comp for Will Levis, he looks a lot like Kenny Pickett to me. Kenny Pickett's a quality quarterback, average. He's good enough to get the job done, but Anthony Richardson can be Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. He could also be nothing, a complete bust and fall flat on his face. But I'm willing to take that chance if I can get that kind of a ceiling out of the quarterback spot like that. So I don't believe them. I think that it's CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, and then there's the wrinkle there with Lamar Jackson. But we'll see how it works out. Either way, this is a very, very quality landing spot. I'm looking at the Colts as the number 2 spot. Moving on to number 1, they also have the first pick in the draft. It's the Carolina Panthers, and it's going to be Bryce Young. So, I mean, this is a bit of a cop-out move for me here, but at the end of the day, this is the number 1 landing spot. They got a quite quality offensive line now that they shored it up last year at left tackle. They got a bunch of pass catchers that just came in. DJ Chark, obviously, Hayden Hurst comes in. And then Terrace Marshall is a guy that I still believe in. Maybe it's fool's gold, but I still believe in Terrace Marshall, and they've said publicly that they expect him to have a massive season. So take that for what it's worth. But yeah, I think that this is the best spot to land for a quarterback. So I wish it was CJ Stroud. I've been drafting my best ball teams, in the big board like it was CJ Stroud back when that was the news. Now that it's, we're where we are at on April 20th, and it looks like it's going to be Bryce Young almost 100%, then, Bryce Young it is, and we'll see how he does. I have my opinions on him, but that's another story for another day. I like CJ Stroud more. I'll tell you that right now, but it's going to be Bryce Young. Either way, this is the number 1 landing spot for a quarterback. So let's move on. We're going to get into the positions here that really, really make a difference on our fantasy team. We're going to start at wide receiver. Some honorable mentions before we get into the top 5. Honorable mentions for wide receivers, the Packers again. Christian Watson still unproven. Say what you will. Yes, he looks good. I like him a lot. Reminds me a lot of potentially Deshaun Jackson as a downfield threat. Romeo Doubs is there, sure. Samori Toure, I don't mind Toure, but if you're putting some competition in there, we'll see who rises to the top. And if they make it a priority, and it's a second, third round pick like they've been doing in recent years and throughout the recent history of the franchise, I think that there could be potentially a number 1 receiver here. I think Christian Watson's probably going to end up being that guy, but at the very least, you should be able to get a number 2 here. Honorable mention because there's some other better spots. The offensive line can use some work. And again, Jordan Love is the quarterback here. We don't really know what we have with Jordan Love. I thought he looked good enough to be an NFL quarterback last year. And I think he will end up being the starter here. And Aaron Rodgers gets traded to the Jets. But honorable mention, not a bad spot. Let's keep our eye on it and see who goes there. If it's a guy that we really like or you really like, you have high on your board, then he lands on the Packers, that might be worth bumping up a couple spots in your rankings for your rookie draft. The Detroit Lions, Josh Reynolds, quality, depth roster wide receiver. I don't not like Josh Reynolds. I love Jameson Williams. He's definitely a guy. I love Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's definitely a guy, but they're going to need another wide receiver there because just in all honesty, Josh Reynolds ain't it. Khalif Raymond ain't it. So they're going to need another guy. There's not a huge tight end. TJ Hawkinson is gone, right? There's not a huge tight end target there. So that's another honorable mention for tight ends that we didn't really talk about. That's a spot that a tight end can go, but whatever. So the Detroit Lions, that's another spot that they could go. Jared Goff's there. They got a quality quarterback, offensive line, offensive coordinator. I don't mind it. We'll keep an eye on the Detroit Lions. And again, it depends on who they get. If it's a slot guy, not loving it. If it's a guy that can do similar things to Jameson Williams, like a Jalen Hyatt or something, might not be super excited. But, if it's a possession type guy, even maybe a guy like, Mingo or Charlie Jones or, Rashee Rice, guys like that, some possession type receivers, Cedric Tillman, I would like, guys like that, then I'll take a look at it with the Detroit Lions. So let's move into the top five. Top five for wide receivers. Atlanta Falcons. People might hate on this one because people hate Arthur Smith. I get it, but at the end of the day, Arthur Smith just doesn't care about your fantasy team. That's kind of what it boils down to. And I think that there's some serious room for a slot receiver, middle of the field type of a guy. We'll see, but I think if Jackson Smith-Njigba goes to this team at number 8, which I think is very, very, very possible. If Jackson Smith-Njigba is an Atlanta Falcons, I'm going to be an Atlanta Falcon. I'm going to be all over that, and I think you should be bumping him up. He's already, going number, the 104, 103, 104, 105 maybe. But that's a quality landing spot for him. I hope he ends up going there. We'll see. But even a guy, like Tank Dell or even Josh Downs, there's a lot of good slot guys in this year's draft. So guys like that, a possession receiver, high target guy, middle of the field type of a guy, kind of a safety blanket, right? Because that's not Kyle Pitts at the tight end position, and that's certainly not Drake London outside. So if you get a middle of the field type of guy, I think he can gobble up nothing crazy, but in a rookie year of 600-700 yards, 3 or 4 touchdowns, something like that. That's going to be some sneaky value. If it's not JSN, if it's Smith-Njigba, he's going to go where he's going to go, and it is what it is. But if it's a lesser known guy that you maybe like, a slot guy, for me, it'd be Tank Dell. If Tank Dell goes here, I'm going to be all over that. Potentially drafting him in the second round, to be honest. We'll see how that works out, but this is the number 5 spot for me. I don't mind it. I like Desmond Ridder. The offensive line is pretty good, and we'll take it from there. So let's move on to number 4. The number 4 spot, we saw this team already. The Los Angeles Chargers. Obviously, I had it for tight end. I'm having it for pass catcher. What's that saying? There's room for someone here, in my opinion. A guy like Zay Jones or, a Jalen Hyatt. I want someone that they don't already have is what I want. They have an over the middle field guy, Keenan Allen. He's fantastic. They have a sideline, go up and get it, Mike Williams, Gerald Everett. I think, again, I had them on the tight end list. I think they could replace him. But I want a burner. I want a straight burner. Jalen Hyatt would be fantastic. Zay Jones, I'm happy, or Zay Flowers, sorry, I'm happy with as well. A guy like that just is a straight burner. Justin Herbert absolutely has the arm. We've seen it. He loves to throw that ball. He throws a great deep ball. There's a very good offensive line. So it's going to be time for him to throw that deep ball. Kellen Moore wants to throw the ball a ton. We all know that. He's the offensive coordinator there now. And at the end of the day, Keenan Allen ain't getting any younger. Mike Williams can't seem to stay healthy. Josh Palmer's quality, but I think if it's a good wide receiver that comes in, he could potentially beat him outright for that third wide receiver spot. And if Keenan Allen and Mike Williams aren't staying healthy all year, like we saw with Josh Palmer last year, there's room for another guy. And again, especially if he's a burner, we could see some serious pop up spike weeks from a fast wide receiver going to the Los Angeles Chargers. So that's my number 4 spot. I think honestly, with this one, a little bit of a caveat. It kind of depends on the type of receiver that goes here. If it's a slot guy that's going to take over for Keenan Allen eventually, Dynasty, yes, absolutely. But for redraft, I'm not, that super excited with it, year one. Maybe it's a guy we'll reassess later on, but I want a burner. So give me a slant and go type of guy, and that's what I'm looking for on the Chargers, and I'm going to bump them up if that ends up happening. Number 3, we got the number 3 spot, the Minnesota Vikings. So obviously Adam Thielen's finally gone. I don't mind KJ Osborne. I've been drafting him a ton in big board drafts. They have the best, one of, if not the best wide receiver in the game in Justin Jefferson. They got a fairly quality, I think they're, above average offensive line. They got an offensive minded coach, likes to throw the ball. We saw Dalvin Cook's numbers dip a little bit last year. And I think Dalvin Cook's probably pretty much definitely not going to be on this team. They got to wait for him to be able to pass a physical. Post June 1, they're going to save, over $10 million the next 2 years, I believe it is. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's tons of money. I very, very much think that they either trade or cut Dalvin Cook. Again, we saw his numbers pull back anyways. They have Madison there. Cool. That's great. They need another wide receiver. TJ Hawkinson's there. He's a fantastic target at tight end. Absolutely. Another guy I've been drafting the shit out of in big boards. They got the best wide receiver, but if you can beat out KJ Osborne, Jalen Naylor's there too. Yeah, sure. Former Michigan State Spartan, but a guy that I would like potentially to go here if they pick him later on in the draft is another Michigan State Spartan, and that's Jaden Reed. I think that he could be, fantastic for this team. If you can beat out KJ Osborne, that's kind of what this all boils down to. If KJ Osborne ends up being the number 2 target, but you're still number 3, again, in a pass first offense, and Kirk Cousins can still get the job done. I really don't care what anyone says. Kirk Cousins can sling it, man. The dude can sling the ball. If he wins a couple, he would have to win probably like 2 Super Bowls, at least one, obviously. He might have the numbers eventually. Not that I'm not going as far as saying he gets in, but he might have the numbers for a Hall of Fame career. And I don't think he gets in unless he wins minimum 1 Super Bowl minimum, but his numbers should be there. Kirk Cousins can sling it. So again, with the way that this offense runs, if you can beat out at least Jalen Naylor, and if you can beat out KJ Osborne, for sure, chalk them up. So if they draft a wide receiver in the first round, a Zay Flowers, where they're at in the draft in the first round, I'm going to be all over that. But to be honest, so is everybody. So, it depends on the receiver. It depends on where he goes. And if it's a guy later in the draft, like a Jonathan Mingo type of guy, again, another guy I'm going to mention, Cedric Tillman, a guy I really like. Guys like that, if they can come in, I'm going to be highlighting them on my board, maybe bumped them up a couple spots in my rookie rankings. So there you go. Number 3, that's the number 3 Minnesota Vikings. Moving on to number 2, the Houston Texans. So I know they don't have a quarterback, and we just went over it's one of the best landing spots for a quarterback. It's not out of this world that Davis Mills ends up starting for this team next year. It's not out of this world. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. We'll see. And again, check out the mock draft on Monday, but we'll see. Either way, Davis Mills has sustained a 1,000-yard receiver in Brandon Cooks 2 years ago. He has done that. Hopefully they stop doing this stupid experiment with Jeff Driscoll, who's not on the team anymore, but he was there last year, and there was this silliness happening where they're pulling him and putting him in, and he was actually throwing. It wasn't a Taysom Hill thing. He was throwing the ball more than Taysom Hill does. It was just a little ridiculous, and that obviously won't happen regardless. I think with the new offensive coordinator coming in again from the San Francisco 49ers, with DeMeco Ryans, I think that a guy like Davis Mills can run that offense. I think if you put Davis Mills on the 49ers, he would be minimum just as good as Brock Purdy. Minimum. Not that I'm saying Davis Mills is a guy, because he's certainly not, but I'm also saying that Brock Purdy's not a guy. So there we go. They do need some wide receiver help, which again, I think they will address in the draft regardless. I think there's a very reasonable possibility that Quentin Johnston is drafted at 12th overall. I know they like him. That's a guy that I would have higher on my list if he goes. The reason why they're here and the team that's at number 1 is here is because if a wide receiver goes to this team, whether it's the first, second, maybe third round, that could be the number one wide receiver on this team. They're not going to be a good team, the Houston Texans, regardless. So they're going to have to throw the ball. They got a reasonable offensive line. Again, even if it is Davis Mills, that's what I'm getting at, is that's kind of worst case scenario, right? Worst case scenario, Davis Mills is slinging the rock for the Houston Texans. He has sustained 1,000-yard wide receiver. They have a quality offensive line. They've got a good offensive coordinator. You get a good wide receiver here. He could be the number one target, 70 catches, 1,000 yards, 5-6 touchdowns, something like that. That's not out of the realm of possibility for any wide receiver that goes here. I'm sure everybody remembers Amon-Ra St. Brown was a fourth round pick, but there was zero competition for him when he got to Detroit, right? So I don't care if they draft a guy in the third, fourth, borderline even fifth round, depending on who it is. They could be the number one target on this team. So that's why I have the Houston Texans so high. Do they have their flaws? Yes, of course. They're not a good team. They're picking number 2 for a reason. But any wide receiver that goes here, there's going to be ample opportunity for that guy to succeed. So there you go. That's number 2. Let's go on to number 1, the Tennessee Titans. Minimum, they're going to have Ryan Tannehill there. You know what you kind of get with Ryan Tannehill. I talked about it in the quarterback section that, Tannehill, I think that this is his last year regardless, if he even makes it to the season. They can walk away from him and save a ton of money post June 1. This could be a target team for a guy like Lamar Jackson. This could be a team that trades up for CJ Stroud with the Mike Vrabel connection with Ohio State. Maybe they go with a local guy, Hendon Hooker, at 12 where they're at and let him sit, let Ryan Tannehill play. And, Hooker takes over next year when he's recovering from the ACL. There's all sorts of opportunities or not opportunities, but just possibilities and scenarios for this team's quarterback position, the Tennessee Titans. So looking at the wide receivers, realistically, it's Treylon Burks and a bunch of guys that people like. Right? People like Kyle Phillips. I get it. Yeah, I don't mind him either. But you telling me that a quality, prospect that comes in here couldn't beat him out for that number 1 spot, or number 2 spot, sorry, or even Trey Burks for that number 1 spot, right? Like there's ample opportunity here for a quality wide receiver. Another guy that I've mentioned a few times, again, local guy, Tennessee, Cedric Tillman, even Jalen Hyatt. Guys like that, if one of those types of guys fall to the Tennessee Titans and it's minimum Ryan Tannehill throwing the ball, I'm all right with that. Offensive line's in a better spot. I don't love the offensive coordinator position here. I'd like to see, a more capable offensive mind, a better offensive mind come into Tennessee. We'll see. And they're going to have to make a switch from Derrick Henry at some point where they're just running the ball 20, 30 times a game. They're going to have to make that switch at some point. And again, it's going to kind of depend on what they do at quarterback, but much like the Houston Texans, this is a spot where a guy can come in and end up being the number 1 wide receiver, especially if it's a slot guy. And there's tons of slot guys in this year's draft. If Jackson Smith and Jigba, again, the Ohio State connection, if he goes there at 12, even with Ryan Tannehill, I'm more than happy with that. Again, everyone would be, but again, Tank Dell, the list goes on for potential guys that can go here. Zay Flowers, guys like that are going to get chalked up your rookie draft. So pay attention to whoever the Tennessee Titans take at wide receiver, because they absolutely will be, maybe not in the first round, maybe not in the second round, but third, fourth, fifth round, they will be taking some wide receivers in this year's draft, at least 1, 2, 3. Pay attention to who they are. If they're guys high on your rankings, on your board, maybe chalk them up a couple spots because they land here. Again, worst case scenario, Ryan Tannehill. Potentially best case scenario, Lamar Jackson. You could be looking at CJ Stroud or Hendon Hooker. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. That's an interesting conversation. But let's move on. We'll move on to the number 1 kind of fantasy spot that we always got to keep an eye on. This position wins or loses you leagues potentially. Obviously, it's the running back spot. So some honorable mentions. The Chargers, they've been in almost literally every list except for quarterback here. With Austin Eckler, he's going to be moving on after this year. So especially if we're talking dynasty, I probably have the Chargers in my top 5. This is kind of just an overall conversation, and they are listed in order, but more of a redraft kind of focus. But if this is dynasty, I'm putting the Chargers up in my top 5 for sure. So Eckler probably won't be there after this year, highly unlikely. He's already not happy. Kellen Moore potentially likes to use, a power back towards the goal line. If we look at what Ezekiel Elliott did last year for the Cowboys. So this could be a good spot for a power back, a guy like maybe Chris Rodriguez or Dwayne McBride, a guy like that. If they go to the Chargers, I'm going to be taking a very, very strong look at them in the, second, third round, that sort of a thing. Jaguars, same sort of things I just said about the Chargers, you can apply to the Jags. Doug Peterson likes to use multiple running backs. He did in Philly. He's said it publicly that he wants to, keep guys fresh and use the hot hand and things like that. Obviously, I know Etienne's there. He's going to be there. He's going to continue to be there, but you can't tell me there's not enough football for more than one running back to eat in that offense. It's a much improved offense. The offensive line's in a quite good spot. I think they addressed it in the draft as well. Very, very quality quarterback. Obviously, again, Doug Peterson running the offense. I'm happy with that. So that's another spot for another type of a power back. And a name that I want to keep top of mind or in the back of your mind for this whole conversation are 2 guys, Ezekiel Elliott and Kareem Hunt. Not for nothing, they could go in and be the power back on any of these teams, especially Ezekiel Elliott. And that's what I see his role as this year. I think someone certainly signs Ezekiel Elliott, and it could be this team behind me with the Ohio State connection. And then he can walk in and be that power back like he was last year for the Cowboys and get you double-digit touchdowns. And I don't care if he gets 600 yards. If he's getting me double-digit touchdowns, I got Ezekiel Elliott on my roster personally. So that's another spot to keep an eye on. The Arizona Cardinals, it could be a really good spot, but they're just going to be a really, really bad team. I honestly think that they could be the worst team in the league next year. So yeah, James Conner's still there as well. That hurts it. So, and again, in a dynasty format, maybe you could bump up the Cardinals a little bit, but I just don't see it for this year. So again, they're just an honorable mention. Let's kick off the top 5. This team has been connected to the number 1 running back in the draft. If he ends up going there, obviously it's Bijan Robinson. If he ends up going to the Philadelphia Eagles, that's going to be, he's already the 101. So there's nothing you can do about that unless you have that pick. But in a redraft setting, man, he's going to be high on a lot of people's lists if he ends up going to the Eagles. I'm not sure if he does. I don't personally think he goes at number 10. I don't think the Eagles take Bijan because it would only be Bijan. I'll say a running back. I don't think they'll take a running back at 10. I don't think they'll get him at 30 either. So they're going to have to trade up from 30 if they want him. I think they make their selection at 10. We'll see how the draft goes. And again, keep an eye out for my mock draft. It'll be live on Monday night. If they draft him or end up getting him later in the draft, trade up with maybe the Bucks at 19. I think that's a quality, spot that I could see him going is 19 regardless. And if he goes to the Eagles, then that's going to be insane. So, but if he doesn't, a guy like Chris Rodriguez, again, McBride, a power back, maybe a guy like Tank Bigsby that I really like, Chase Brown, guys like that. Let's keep an eye on the Philadelphia Eagles because it's a quality spot, number 5 on the list for a running back. Number 4, Dallas Cowboys. I know they have Tony Pollard. A lot of people are hoping and wanting and thinking that he's going to be, a 20-touch guy, 15 to 20 touches a game. It's just not what you want to get out of Tony Pollard. Realistically, you want 12 to 16 touches total out of Tony Pollard a game, and then you want another guy getting 8 to 12. That's the way I look at it. Look at what happened with Zeke last year. That's a split that I'd like to see. Makes tons of sense. And again, Tony Pollard coming off that injury, that's a concern. Franchise tag. So in a dynasty format, we could see the Cowboys being an even better landing spot. So that's what I like. They like to run the ball. Mike McCarthy's already said that he wants to run the ball more. That was a big reason why the fallout with Kellen Moore happened. Mike McCarthy's going to be calling plays for the Cowboys this year. They're going to want to run the ball more. And Tony Pollard's not a 20 to 25 carries type of a running back. He's just not that guy, and he's never going to be that guy. And you don't want to do that to him, right? He's only 25 years old. He's good at what he does, and he's great at what he does. So you might as well just keep rolling with that role that you have with Tony Pollard. Get another guy in here that can beat out those backups and be that guy. Number 3, Miami Dolphins. Very, very quality spot to go. I know they have Jeff Wilson. I know they have Raheem Mostert. And I know that Mike McDaniel really likes those guys. But I think that there's absolutely room, again, especially in the dynasty format. Big caveat here is Dalvin Cook is very heavily rumored to be a target for the Miami Dolphins. I could certainly see that happening. It's definitely a place that I think he would fit. He's a Florida guy. Makes tons of sense. Could be a trade or a cut, and they just sign him, all that sort of stuff. So we'll see what they do in the draft. If they do draft a guy, that's a guy I'm going to look to target. If they don't, I'm basically chalking it up that they're getting Dalvin Cook, more or less is how I'm looking at it. So again, if a guy can come in there as a rookie and, Jeff Wilson hasn't stayed healthy his whole career at all. Raheem Mostert certainly hasn't stayed healthy. They're both at or pushing 30. I think Mostert is 30. I think Jeff Wilson's 29, something like that. They're right around 30. So you get a rookie to come in here as long as he can beat out, Salvin Ahmed, guys like that. I'm really not concerned. But again, if they don't draft a guy, I'm basically chalking that up that Dalvin Cook is going to be a Dolphin after he gets either traded or cut from the Minnesota Vikings. So quality spot, quality offensive coach, decent offensive line, one that I think that they could address in this year's draft, and I think that they will. They don't have a first-round pick after forfeiting that, trying to schmooze Tom Brady a little early. But if they address the offensive line and then again, 3rd, 4th, 5th round running backs, that's relatively high draft capital, to be honest with you. Again, the poster boy for this whole episode, Dameon Pierce, was a 4th round running back. So there you go. 4th round running back goes to the Miami Dolphins. That's going to definitely move the needle for me. I'm going to be paying attention to that. Moving on to number 2. So number 2 is a bit of a heartbreaker for me. I was always a massive, massive believer in Javonte Williams, massive believer. But what he did to his knee last year was really, really not good. I've always been a guy that's avoided running backs that have torn their ACL. I will not touch them the year after. I just will not. So Breece Hall's off my board this year. Javonte Williams is off my board this year. Worked out for me with Dalvin Cook. Worked out for me with Saquon Barkley. I'm just going to keep rolling on that train and keep it on the tracks. That's the way that I'm attacking those 2 running backs this year as far as my draft board is concerned. So Samaje Perine comes in. You can see the jerseys behind me. Huge Bengals fan. He's not going to be a guy that's going to be some sort of bell cow for this team. He's a quality player, decent 3rd down back. He can catch the ball to the backfield. He's responsible in pass pro, but he's certainly not your guy. If they go out and they draft a guy in the 3rd round which I think is completely plausible, 2nd, 3rd round, even a guy that comes in and let's say they get Zach Charbonnet. They go ahead and get Zach Charbonnet, that's going to really hurt Javonte Williams, but that's going to boost Zach Charbonnet up a ton, in my opinion. He should get above Jahmyr Gibbs, depending on where he gets drafted, but he should move ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs if that's the landing spot, the Denver Broncos for Zach Charbonnet. So quality offensive line that they invested in the offseason. Russell Wilson, say what you want, but it's still Russell Wilson, and hopefully he figures it out, with Sean Payton coming in. That's another thing right there. Sean Payton comes in to run this team. Couldn't really ask for a better offensive mind. So there you go. I think that this is a great spot. They got quality wide receivers. This is a fantastic spot with Javonte Williams already pretty much scheduled to miss games in 2023 early, and Samaje Perine really being your only competition. I think it's a great spot. So you get a good quality running back coming in. And again, if it's a guy that's high on your board, if this is the landing spot, you might throw him to the top of your list right behind Bijan Robinson because he's not going anywhere. It is what it is. But there you go. Denver Broncos, number 2 landing spot for a running back. Moving on to number 1. This is not a homer pick at all. Trust me on that. Number one landing spot for running back in this year's draft is the team you see behind me, the Cincinnati Bengals. Why? Well, a few reasons. Number one, Joe Mixon, I think it's time for him to go. There's a lot of things going on with Joe Mixon. Number one, he's not the greatest human being on the planet to begin with. Number two, multiple gun-related issues, charges potentially coming up. One happened the day before the AFC Championship game. That's pretty annoying and upsetting for me. Who knows what the truth is on those things? The 100% truth. Obviously, we know the truth about what happened, before he came into the NFL. We certainly know that truth. But with all these new accusations and gun-related issues coming up, we don't know what the truth is yet. And, we'll see what happens with his legal issues. But regardless, I think it's time for a change. I think it's time that we move on from Joe Mixon. I've never been, and if you've been a fan of this channel, I've never been a huge supporter of Joe Mixon. And it's not just because I don't particularly love him as a person. It's because he's not that good of a running back, period. He never has been, and he never will be. He just always is trying to hit home runs. Every time he touches the ball, he wants to take it to the crib for a 50-yard touchdown. There's sometimes you got to take 2, 3, 4, 5 yards. You got to get what you can get. Move north-south. There's just too much east-west with him, and it drives me nuts. I think any other running back in any other quality enough running back in the NFL would do just as good, have just as good of numbers if they had the volume that Joe Mixon has had throughout his career with Cincinnati. Beyond all that, they save over $10 million for the next 2 years if they cut him post June 1. I think that that's absolutely 100% what happens. It's been in the news. It's not, it's not crazy breaking news over here, but it just doesn't make sense to keep him. It's a total of just over $5 million in dead money over 2 years, and you save over $20 million in cap savings over 2 years. I think it's just a no-brainer. It's time to go. One thing that I could see this team potentially doing, they certainly won't trade up in the first round to get Bijan Robinson. I think that would be great. It's never going to happen. I know the Bengals. Obviously, look at the guard behind me here. I know this team. They will not trade up in the first round. They just don't. They barely ever trade at all. So I fully expect them to stay where they're at in every round for the most part. I'm always just floored if they do trade at any point. If they can get Bijan Robinson where they're at, amazing. I'm ecstatic. Extremely happy. He's already the 101 anyways. In redrafts, if I have the 101 in a redraft, I'm probably taking Bijan Robinson if he goes to my Bengals. But I don't particularly expect him to be there. And so it is what it is. But if they go with a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, I don't particularly see them doing that either. Personally, I think they take a corner in the first round. And again, keep an eye out for my mock draft live streaming on Monday. But running back's a spot that they're going to address. It might be second round. Again, it's a late round pick in the second, late round pick in the third, fourth, fifth. They have a late round pick in every round, and they probably won't trade. They'll just stick and pick. So we'll see who they end up getting. They will 100% be drafting a running back that you can take to the bank. And whoever it is, I'm going to be definitely putting some fantasy capital into. One thing I think they could do, like I just said, Jahmyr Gibbs, if they get a guy like him, and then they go ahead and sign, local guy, Ezekiel Elliott. I think that Thunder and Lightning would be phenomenal for this team. That's a massive upgrade for anything they've had at running back for a lot of years if they have that 1-2 punch with the offensive line. Offensive coordinators in a good spot. Like I said, the offensive line is very good, better than it's probably ever been since I've been a Cincinnati Bengal fan. And we'll see what they do. But any running back that goes to Cincinnati, that's a spot that I'm absolutely keying on, my number one spot for a running back. And there you go. There you go. That's it. So welcome back to Off the Schneid. Welcome back to the channel. Look out for a lot more content coming out in the next however long. It'll get into best ball season soon, and I'll be live streaming best ball drafts. So if you want to draft with me, Follow me on Twitter. If you do follow me on Twitter, you know I'm a bit of a best ball psycho. So join when I start that up once the Best Ball Mania starts up and the puppies and all that, and we'll get that rolling. But keep an eye out for my mock draft. I'm going to do a conversation about Lamar Jackson, a guy we talked about a little bit in this episode here. I want to deep dive that situation a little bit, and a few other things coming up. So keep an eye out for it. If you like the content, if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. If you hit that like button, that would be great as well. It really helps out the channel that I'm trying to get back rolling again. But appreciate you guys coming out. We'll see you on the next episode. That'll be at the very least, at the latest, you're going to see me on Monday night doing my mock draft live. Bring your questions, comments. I'd love to see the chat light up a little bit. But we'll see you next time.